The peacemakers came in threes, because someone in a boardroom had once calculated that 3 was the number at which a man stopped being a person and started being a problem to be closed. Kal-El had lost count of how many 3s he had met. They dropped out of the smog over the Lazarus extraction site on repulsor harnesses, rifles already warm, and the first volley hammered into his chest with a sound like hail on a tin roof. It did nothing. It never did much, not to the skin. The rounds flattened and fell, ringing off the concrete at his boots, and behind him, the 60-odd laborers he'd pulled off the night shift pressed themselves flat against the ore hoppers and prayed to gods that Lazarus Corp had priced out of their reach years ago. "Solar reserves at 19%, Sol said, in the voice his mother had given it. "Calm. Always calm. I would recommend restraint." "Later," Kal-El said, and moved. The cape wasn't cloth. It never had been. It was a cloud of finely ground sunstone, 10,000 motes of Krypton's last dust hovering at his shoulders, and when he flexed his will through Sol, the dust hardened into a wall between the peacemakers and the workers, a shield the color of dried blood, humming with the charge it stole from the air. He crossed the yard before the nearest gunman finished his second breath. He did not hit the man. He took the rifle, folded it once like a bad letter, and set the trooper down on the ground with a gentleness that always seemed to frighten them more than violence would have. That was the thing the boardrooms could never model. He was not there to win. He was there so that the men in the ore pits would live to see morning and be paid what the ledgers owed them, and everything else, the rifles, the harnesses, the 3s, was only weather he had to walk through to get there. The smell of the place stayed with him, diesel and hot metal, and the sour tang of frightened people. The exact scent of every mine and every guild yard he had ever pried open. He had smelled it first on Krypton, in the labor guild yards where his father coughed rock dust into a rag and called it an honest day. He had smelled it the night the Science League's private ships lit their engines and lifted the clever and the wealthy off a dying world, leaving the people of steel to watch the sky burn. He had promised himself, standing in that ash, that Earth would not end the way his home had ended. He was still keeping the promise. He would keep it until the sun ran out of him. The third peacemaker was smarter than his fellows. He didn't fire. He triggered the site's failsafe, an experimental Lazarus containment charge, half a research grant and half a threat, buried under the extraction rig, and the yard filled with a white the eye could not hold. Kal-El. For the first time in a long time, Sol did not sound calm. That signature is not conventional. I cannot. The ground opened, not down, sideways. A seam of light peeled the air apart the way a wound opens under a scalpel, silent and total, and the pressure that came off it hauled at him like a tide with hands. He set his heels. He was Kryptonian. He had held bridges up and let trucks break against his back. He could hold against a hole in the world. He was wrong. The last thing he did on his own Earth was throw the sunstone shield backward over the workers, sealing them behind him where the pull couldn't reach. And then the seam took him, and the light closed over his head, and there was a long moment of nothing at all. He fell out of a gray sky into a city that had never heard his name. There was no ceremony to it. One instant, void. The next, wind screaming past a body moving far too fast, the underside of low cloud whipping by, and beneath him, a sprawl of rooftops and rail lines and glass towers he did not recognize. No Lazarus logo burned into the skyline. No drone lanes. No ash. Somewhere down there a train ran on time. Somewhere a vending machine glowed on a corner. Reserves at 4%, Sol reported. The transit was expensive. I am damaged. Recommend you do not attempt flight. Noted. Kal-El managed and hit the ground. He came down in a plaza outside a commuter station, and the impact cratered the pavers in a ring 6 meters wide, throwing up a wave of dust and shattered tile that rained back down across parked bicycles and a row of vending machines. The crash rolled out across the district like a dropped anvil. Car alarms answered it in a dozen keys. A woman screamed, then stopped, unsure whether screaming was even the right response to what she was seeing. What she was seeing was a man rising out of a hole in the ground. He rose slowly, because 4% of anything is not much, and the wrongness of the sky pressed on him harder than any peacemaker ever had. The sun here was there. He could feel it, faint, feeding him in a thin trickle. but it hid behind a lid of cloud and city haze, and his cells drank at it the way a thirsty man sips through a straw. On his own Earth, even a broken day gave him more than this. He straightened, sunstone dust settling around his shoulders in a slow, exhausted drift, and looked at a street sign he could not read, printed in an alphabet he had never seen. "This is not our Earth," Saul said quietly. "I have no reference for any of it." Kal-El said nothing. He had learned long ago that the first thing to do in a strange yard was find the people who were afraid, and stand between them and whatever came next. Right now, the people who were afraid were pointing their phones at him. If you're new here, this is the channel where any hero, any villain, any universe can crash into another, and we find out what breaks. So go ahead and subscribe, and if there's a crossing you want to see next, drop me a universe and a character in the comments, and I'll build the whole thing. Every one of these is written by me. This one, plotting robot asked for. Now, back to a man of steel standing in a hole in a country that files its heroes like tax returns. The crowd should have run. On his Earth, they would have run, or filmed it from behind cover with the flat resignation of people who had watched the powerful fight, the powerful their whole lives. These people did neither. A few backed up, most simply, waited, phones raised, with an expression Kal-El had never seen on a civilian face before. Not terror, but a kind of expectant appraisal, as if a show were about to start, and someone would shortly arrive to run it. He understood the look a few seconds later, when the first of them arrived. The man dropped from a rooftop and landed clean in the center of the plaza, and the crowd's murmur shifted register. Not fear, but recognition. The sound a stadium makes when a familiar player takes the field. He wore a costume, engineered and deliberate, and he moved like someone who had been trained and licensed and ranked to move exactly this way. A professional. Kal-El had met men who fought for money before. He had never met one the public cheered. "Sir," the hero called, hands loose, wary, reading the crater and the drifting red dust and the impossible undamaged figure at its center. "You're at the site of a Quirk-related incident. I need you to power down and stay where you are. Emergency services are on the way, and so is," a flicker of something, almost relief. "So is somebody who can sort out whatever your quirk is." "Quirk," Saul repeated, turning the word over. "A designation. I am cross-referencing the local broadcast spectrum now. Kal-El, this world is saturated with it. Roughly 4 in 5 human biosignatures carry an active metagene. Superhuman ability appears to be ordinary here, and regulated, heavily." Kal-El looked at the hero, at the crowd filming with their expectant showtime eyes, at the vending machines and the punctual train and the glass towers with no Lazarus crest, a city that had somehow made peace with a world full of power, and had turned that peace, he was already beginning to suspect, into an industry. "I don't have a quirk," Kal-El said. His voice carried, low and even, and the plaza went quiet to hear it. "And I'm not going to fight you. I fell. I'm trying to understand where." The hero's jaw tightened. That answer had not been in his training. Overhead, the first news chopper banked in over the rooftops, its camera already live, and 3 streets away a police cordon was forming with the smooth, bureaucratic speed of a system that had done this 1,000 times. In a records office somewhere across the city, an officer was even now typing the crash into a national quirk registry that had a category for everything: fire, ice, gravity, blood, and would return, in about 90 seconds, a single blinking line that said "no match found." And in a bare office far above all of it, where the Hero Public Safety Commission kept the ledgers that decided which heroes rose and which quietly vanished, a very calm person was already watching the chopper feed and reaching for a phone. Kal-El felt the thin sun on his shoulders and, under it, something colder. He knew the shape of a place that sorted its people into those who counted and those who didn't. He had grown up inside one. He had buried one. He had just fallen into another. Solar reserves at 5% and climbing. Soul murmured, slowly. "Kal-El, whatever this world is, it does not yet know what you are. I would suggest we keep it that way as long as we can." Down the avenue, the crowd parted for a man in black with tired eyes and a long gray scarf that moved on its own, walking toward the crater without hurry, already staring at the newcomer with a flat, assessing gaze. A gaze that, on this world, had ended 100 fights before they began. Kal-El met the tired eyes, and quietly, waited to see what this earth would try. The man in black stopped 10 meters short of the crater and looked at Kal-El, the way a mechanic looks at an engine making a sound it shouldn't. Up close, everything about him was designed to be forgotten. Dark clothes, dark hair, the long gray scarf pooling and shifting around his throat, like something with opinions of its own. He did not pose for the cameras. He did not even seem to know they were there. In a plaza full of people performing for lenses, he was the one man doing a job, and Kal-El respected him for it, before either of them had said a word. "Name's Eraserhead," the man said, in a voice sanded flat by too many nights and not enough sleep. "You've got a crowd, an unregistered power signature, and a hole in a public plaza. Standard procedure is I neutralize you, and we sort the rest out at the station. Nothing personal." "I understand procedure," Kal-El said, and he did. He had grown up under more procedure than this world could dream of. "I'm not going to resist you. But I should tell you honestly, I don't think it's going to work." Something flickered behind the tired eyes. Not anger, interest. On this earth, Kal-El would learn. Everyone told Eraserhead that his power wouldn't work on them, and Eraserhead had spent 15 years proving every single one of them wrong. "Kal-El," Soul murmured, threading data he couldn't see. "His metagene profile is unusual. Whatever his ability is, it is aimed outward. A suppression field, keyed to other metagenes. He intends to switch you off." A pause. "He does not understand that there is nothing in you to switch." Kal-El said nothing. He let the man work. Eraserhead's hair rose. It lifted off his shoulders, as though the room had lost its gravity, drifting upward in a slow black corona, and his eyes bled from brown to a hard, luminous red. The scarf snapped taut. Across the plaza, a hush rolled through the crowd, the reflexive silence of people who had watched this exact moment on the news 100 times and never once seen it fail. Somewhere, a child whispered a hero's ranking to her mother. The chopper camera zoomed. This was the beat where the impossible got made ordinary again, where whatever a person could do got quietly unmade, and the professional took them in. His stare landed on Kal-El like a hand pressed flat against the chest, and nothing happened. Kal-El felt it, a real thing, a genuine pressure, a searching field combing over him looking for the thread it was built to cut. It was not weak. On a Quirk user, it would have severed the connection between the will and the gift in an instant. It swept through him, over him, into him, hunting for the seam where his power was bolted to his blood. There was no seam, there was no Quirk. There was a boy from the Redlands whose cells had drunk a yellow sun and a suit of his mother's making wrapped around his heart, and neither of those things was a metagene, and neither of those things could be turned off by a man staring very hard. Eraserhead kept staring. His eyes were watering now, the strain of holding Erasure a physical cost. Red irises trembling. His hair stayed up. His power was on. He could feel it running, could feel it doing exactly what it always did. And the man in the crater simply stood there, sunstone dust drifting red around his shoulders, entirely, impossibly intact. For the first time in 15 years, Eraserhead's face changed. He blinked. He had to. The dryness forced it, and his hair dropped and his eyes cooled to brown, and he stood in the wreckage of a procedure that had never once failed him, staring at a man his gift could not find. "That's not possible," he said, quietly, almost to himself. "I told you honestly," Kal-El said. "There was no triumph in it. If anything, there was apology. It isn't yours to switch off. It was never what did you call it? A quirk. It's just what I am." A second figure came through the police line then, coat and hat, a detective's tired dependability. He'd been listening. He walked to the crater's edge, opened a notebook out of pure habit, and looked at the newcomer with the flat curiosity of a man whose own power let him hear the shape of a lie, the way other people heard a wrong note. "I'm going to ask you some questions," the detective said. "Just answer them plainly. Where are you from?" "A different Earth," Kal-El said. "Not this one. I was pulled out of my world through a tear and dropped into yours. I didn't choose to come. I don't know how to get back." The detective's pen stopped. His Quirk had heard every word, and every word had rung true. Not sincere, not deluded, true. The man believed it, because it was so, and the detective's gift could not tell him how a thing so absurd could also be a fact. He looked up at Eraserhead, and the two professionals shared a glance that said, in the shorthand of colleagues, "This one goes above us." They were right. It already had. While they conferred, Kal-El looked at the world they'd built. He could not read the signs, but he did not need language to read a society. He had been reading them his whole life. He read it in the billboard on the tower across the plaza, 4 stories tall, where a smiling hero in bright armor sold a soft drink beside a number, a rank, printed in gold. He read it in the way the crowd's phones had swung, in perfect unison, from him to Eraserhead and back, tracking their entertainment. He read it in the merchandise. A boy near the cordon clutched a stuffed doll shaped like a man he would later learn was the greatest hero alive, and a girl beside him wore a keychain of a hero who had died the previous spring, mass-produced, still selling. He read it in the machinery, the licenses, the registry that had a category for fire and blood and gravity and, finding no box for him, had raised the alarm not because he had hurt anyone, he had hurt no one, but because he did not fit the filing system. On this world, power was not the thing that frightened people. Unlicensed power was. Power that answered to no rank, no agency, no commission, no ledger. He knew this shape. God help him, he knew it in his bones. On Krypton, they had worn their caste on their chests, the crest that said Science League and the crest that said Labor Guild, the mark you were born into and could never take off, printed on your body so that the sorting was done before you spoke. Here they had done something more elegant. Here the caste was a number, and they had made the sorting feel like admiration. They cheered the top rank and forgot the bottom one, and they called the whole beautiful machine heroism, and the people filming him did not know, could not know, that they were watching a man who had grown up at the bottom of exactly this, who had watched the numbered and the licensed board their ships, and leave the unnumbered to burn. "Your reserves are at 11%, Soul said, very softly, the way it spoke when it could feel his heart doing something it didn't like. Kal-El, your pulse is elevated. This world is not Krypton." "No," he murmured, too low for the microphones. "It just files people the same way." The scent of the plaza reached him again through the settling dust, hot pavement, ozone from Eraserhead's spent power, the faint sugar and plastic smell of the vending machines still humming at the cordon, indifferent. A punctual, prosperous, well-run world that had solved the problem of superhuman power by turning it into a career with a leaderboard. It was not evil. That was the part that always undid him. Krypton had not been evil either, right up until the day it was. Eraserhead walked back to the crater's lip. He'd made a decision the way underground heroes made decisions. Fast, unsentimental, and with a wariness that had kept him alive. "Here's where we are," he said. "I can't restrain you. My quirk won't touch you, and I'm not going to embarrass myself trying to put a capture weapon on a man who fell through the sky and didn't feel it, so I'm not going to pretend I'm in control of this." His red-rimmed eyes held Kal-El's. "In return, you keep standing exactly where you are. You don't fly, you don't fight, and you let the process happen. Can you do that?" "I can," Kal-El said. "I don't want to fight. I've had enough of those for one day, and I've had them on a bigger scale than you'd believe." He glanced at the billboard, the gold rank, the smiling armored face. "I'd rather understand your world before it decides what to do about me." "It's already deciding," Eraserhead said, and there was something almost like sympathy in the flat delivery of it. "You showed up as a category error in the most regulated hero economy on the planet. That means people well above my pay grade are watching this feed right now, and they don't like errors, they like files." He tilted his head at the sky, where the chopper still circled. "By tonight, somebody's going to want to put you in one." As if summoned, the detective's phone rang. He answered, listened, and his face did the small, careful thing that faces do when the person on the other end outranks everyone present. He lowered the phone and looked up at the man in the crater with new, cautious eyes. "The Hero Public Safety Commission is sending a representative," he said. "They want him assessed, registered, and, their word, situated. Tonight." Eraserhead exhaled through his nose, the sound of a man who had heard that word from that office before, and knew exactly what it could mean for people who didn't fit. Kal-El only looked at the gold number on the tower, 4 stories high, selling a soft drink over a city that had learned to love its own ledger. Situated, he thought. He had heard 100 words for it, in a dozen guild yards, on 2 dying worlds. It always meant the same thing. It meant find out where this one belongs in the order of things, and if it belongs nowhere the order allows, make it belong to us, or make it gone. 12%, and climbing. The thin sun pressed at his shoulders like a promise. He decided, standing in the broken pavers with the whole watching world in his eyes, that he would let their process come. He would be patient. He would be gentle, the way he always tried to be first. But he had made a vow in the ash of one caste already. He was not going to be situated into another. The Hero Public Safety Commission did not have a face, and that was the point. It occupied a floor of a government building that appeared on no tourist map, and its authority ran through the hero economy the way tendons run through a hand. Invisible, load-bearing, felt only when they pulled. It licensed. It ranked. It decided which heroes were promoted into the light, and which were quietly retired into silence. And it did all of this beneath the great warm public story of heroism, the story of smiling numbers on billboards, so that the citizens who cheered the rankings never had to think about the office that wrote them. By the time the sun set on Kal-El's first day, the commission had watched the crater footage 40 times. The woman assigned to the file was named Hoshino Rei, and she was very good at her job, which on this floor meant she was very good at turning people into paperwork. She sat in a briefing room with the lights low and the crater feed frozen on the wall, the man rising out of the broken pavers, the red dust settling, Eraserhead's erasure visibly, impossibly failing, and she narrated the problem to the 4 department heads on the call in the flat, denatured language the commission preferred. Subject presents as a humanoid male, adult, unregistered, Hoshino said. No metagene signature. That is not a redaction. That is the finding. Eraserhead, deployed erasure at full duration and reported no target. The registry returns no match on ability class, because the ability does not appear to be a quirk. She let that sit. He claims extra-dimensional origin. Naomasa's testimony indicates he believes it, and Naomasa's quirk indicates it may be true. Threat assessment is the difficulty. He has demonstrated durability sufficient to no-sell a quirk erasure field and an impact that cratered reinforced pavement, and he has, to this point, harmed exactly no one. He de-escalated. He surrendered to process voluntarily. Then where's the problem? One of the department heads said. The problem, Hoshino said, is that we cannot restrain him, we cannot suppress him, and we cannot rank him. He is more powerful than most of our top 10, and he answers to nothing in our structure. If he decided tomorrow to walk into the diet building, I do not currently have a hero on the boards I am confident could stop him. She folded her hands. A hero we cannot stop is not a hero. It is weather, and the public does not tolerate weather it did not vote for. On the wall, the frozen man stood in his crater with his terrible gentleness, and none of the 4 voices on the call said the thing they were all circling, so Hoshino said it for them, because that was also her job. We have 2 options, she said. We bring him inside the structure, license him, rank him, give him an agency handler, make him legible to the public as one of ours, or we treat him as an unregistered variable and begin developing the means to remove him, if he ever becomes one. Those are the only 2 shapes this can take. There is no third shape where a being that strong simply wanders the country unaccountable. The system does not survive that precedent. A beat. Neither do we. The call was quiet for a moment. Then the senior voice, older, drier, the one that spoke for the president who never spoke herself, said the word that would define everything that followed. Situate him, it said, gently, if he lets us, firmly, if he doesn't, but situated, one way or the other, before the story gets away from us. And Hoshino, start the second track anyway, quietly. I want to know what stops him, just in case the first track fails. Hoshino wrote it down. Track 1, integrate. Track 2, contingency. She did not feel cruel writing it. She never did. That was the thing the man in the crater would never be able to make her understand. From where she sat, filing a god was not tyranny. It was responsibility. Someone had to hold the ledger, or the whole warm story fell apart, and better it be someone careful than someone cruel. She did not yet grasp that the man in the crater had heard that exact justification before, in the mouths of the Science League, on the last good day his world ever had. The story, of course, got away from them anyway. It always did. By midnight, the crater footage was the only thing on the country's screens. The talking heads had a name for him already, because the public needed a name the way it needed rankings, a hunger for legibility, for the reassuring feeling that a thing was known. They tried the Dust Man, for the red cape that wasn't cloth. They tried Category 0, for the registry line, a morning show with a hero gossip segment settled, with the grim inevitability of branding, on the fallen. He had fallen from the sky, and it sounded ominous and marketable, and it stuck. Kal-El watched a clip of himself being named on a screen in the holding facility, and understood none of the words, and all of the meaning. They are building you into a product, Saul observed. The way they build all of them. There is a merchandising subsidiary that has already registered 3 trademarks on your silhouette. You have existed on this world for 9 hours. On Krypton, it took them a generation to make a man into a crest, Kal-El said. Here it takes an afternoon. He watched the screen, his own crater, replayed, scored with dramatic music. They're faster than my homeworld was. I'm not sure yet whether that's better or worse. The facility they'd put him in was not a cell exactly. Erasure Head had insisted on that. No bars they both knew wouldn't hold him. No theater of restraint. It was a quiet room with a barred skylight and, at Kal-El's request, an unobstructed view of the east. He had asked for the east because he had done the math the way he always did. Without theater, he needed the dawn. 11% had crept to 19 through the evening as the haze thinned. And if they gave him a clear sunrise, he would climb faster than any of them understood. He did not tell them that. He simply asked for the east and let them think it sentiment. He sat under the barred sky and waited for the light. And outside, across the sleeping city, the man who wanted to be the greatest hero alive was watching the same footage with a very different fire in his eyes. Endeavor did not watch the crater feed for the reasons the commission did. He watched it in his office, alone. The flames at his shoulders banked to a low blue mutter, and he watched it the way a climber watches a new and unexpected face of a mountain he has spent his entire life ascending. For years there had been one number above him, and one number only. A golden, laughing, city-shaking number, the symbol of peace. The man Endeavor had chased for 2 decades and never caught. He had built his whole self around being second. He had made his children into instruments of the chase. He had burned himself hollow reaching for a first place that another man occupied by simply existing. And now, out of a torn sky, had fallen a variable. He replayed the Erasure clip. He watched the strongest suppression quirk in the country wash over the newcomer and find nothing to suppress. He watched, with a professional's cold clarity, a durability that his hell flame, the hottest fire on the boards, might not so much as blister. And something in the flame at his shoulders leaned toward the screen, hungry, because Endeavor's mind did not work like Hoshino's. Hoshino saw a filing problem. Endeavor saw 2 things at once, and they warred in him. The first thing he saw was a rival. If this creature was as strong as the footage suggested, stronger than All Might perhaps, in raw output, then the number Endeavor had chased his whole life was about to be devalued, and his second place with it. What was the point of finally, someday, standing above the symbol of peace? If a man had just fallen from the sky who stood above them both, he had sacrificed everything for a rank. He would not watch a stranger make the rank meaningless. The second thing he saw, quieter, was a rung. Because if he could be the hero who brought the newcomer to heel, who tested him, contained him, or best of all, stood beside him as an equal on a battlefield the cameras happened to be watching, then Endeavor did not need to surpass All Might at all. He needed only to be the man the country trusted with its unfillable god. That was a first place of a different kind. That was a rung the commission itself would have to hand him. He was still ambitious enough to want the number. He was tired enough, lately, since a certain quiet reckoning had begun in his own house, since he had started to see what his climbing had cost the children he had shaped into rivals, to be unsure whether the number was worth what it had already taken from him. Both things were true in him at once, and that contradiction was the most human thing about Endeavor, and he hated it. His phone lit with a message from the commission liaison. Assessment scheduled 0900. Endeavor, Rank 2. Requested as evaluation partner. Objective. Gauge subject's power ceiling under controlled contact. Endeavor read it twice. Evaluation partner. They wanted him to be the stick against which they measured the god, to walk into a room with a man Erasure couldn't touch and find out, with his own body, how far the power went. It was a test of the newcomer. It was also, though the commission would never say so, a test of him, a chance to prove his flame still meant something, in a world where a category error had just fallen out of the clouds. The blue fire at his shoulders climbed, slow and certain, to orange. "Fine," he said, to no one. "Let's find out what you are." Far above the city, in the private residence that the country's real symbol kept behind 3 false addresses, All Might watched the same footage and did not think about rankings at all. He was thin, tonight, in the way the public never saw. The great golden frame collapsed to the gaunt, hollow-eyed truth of a man running out of the borrowed hours of One for All, a coughed handful of blood still bright on the tissue in his fist. He had less time than anyone knew. He had, he suspected, less time than he knew, and he watched the man in the crater fall out of the sky and refused to hurt a soul, watched him surrender to process rather than break the men who came to bind him, and All Might felt something he had not felt in a long while about a stranger. He felt hope, and under it, fear. Hope, because a being that strong who chose gentleness first was rarer than any power in any registry. And this world was going to need heroes it could not manufacture, soon, sooner than it feared, when the borrowed hours ran out and the symbol of peace was gone. Fear, because he had watched enough power move through the world to know that the machine below, the commission, the rankings, the merchandising subsidiary that had already trademarked the silhouette, did not know how to receive a gift like that. It only knew how to file it. And a thing that would not be filed, this world had a way of turning into an enemy, whether it started as one or not. "Be careful with him," All Might said softly, to the frozen figure on his screen, to an office of careful people who would never hear it. "You have never in your lives caught something you couldn't rank. Don't reach for the leash first." They would reach for the leash first. He knew them. They always did. In the quiet room with the barred skylight, Kal-El felt the sky begin, at last, to gray toward morning in the east. He turned his face to it. The first true light of this alien sun slid through the bars and touched his skin, and for the first time since he'd fallen, he felt his cells open to it and drink, not the thin, straw-sipped trickle of the hazy afternoon, but a real dawn, clean above the smog, pouring into him. "Reserves climbing," Saul said, and there was something almost like relief in it. 22%, 24. "This world's sun is compatible, Kal-El. Given a clear day, you will be at full capacity within 72 hours. "Good," Kal-El said, not because he wanted power, because he had learned, on 2 worlds, that when the careful people came with their leash, it was better to be too strong to be leashed, and gentle enough to choose not to break them. The gentleness was who he was. The strength was only so that the gentleness could survive contact with men who mistook it for weakness. At 9 o'clock they would open his door, and a man made of fire would walk in to find out how far he went. Kal-El sat in the widening dawn, drinking the light, and prepared to disappoint everyone who expected him to be either a monster or a rung. At 9 o'clock the door opened, and the room filled with the smell of burning, before Endeavor had taken a single step through it. He came in banked, but not cold, a low corona of orange muttering at his shoulders, the air warping above his head, 20 years of being the second hottest thing in the country, worn like a coat he refused to take off. He filled the doorway. He was meant to. Behind him, 2 commission observers took up positions with the studied casualness of people prepared to record a death and call it an incident. Kal-El stood in the widening light of the barred skylight and did not move toward him. "They tell me you fell out of the sky and a Quirk erasure field slid off you like rain," Endeavor said. The flame at his collar climbed a notch. "They tell me nobody knows what stops you. I'm here to find the number." "I don't want to fight you," Kal-El said. He said it the way he had said it to Eraserhead, plainly, without heat, and it landed on Endeavor exactly the way it had not been meant to, as a challenge, because to a man who had built his soul out of rank, "I don't want to fight you," sounded like "I don't think you're worth the effort." "Then this'll be quick," Endeavor said, and threw a fist of fire. Kal-El had, over the years, been hit by things that could level a district. He had held Krypton's dust storms off 100 workers with his own body. He knew, the instant the hellflame crossed the room, that this was real. Not a pushover, not a Mook's rifle, but the hottest sustained fire this world had produced. A jet that could flash a truck to slag. It hit his chest, and his forearm where he'd raised it, and it hurt, in the distant way that reminded him he was drinking a strange sun and running at a quarter of himself. He did not burn. The flame washed over him, roared around him, filled the room with a light like a small sun, and a heat that cracked the concrete at his feet, and Kal-El stood in it, red sunstone dust swirling and hardening at his shoulders to bleed the worst of it away, and did not fall, and did not swing back. He let it end. When Endeavor cut the jet, the room was scorched black in a fan behind Kal-El, and the man himself was untouched, his skin faintly, briefly aglow where the fire had fed the very thing it was meant to destroy. Endeavor stared. He had put enough into that to end most fights on the boards. The commission observers had stopped writing. "You're drinking it," Endeavor said slowly. "Not stupid. Never stupid. Whatever else he was. The fire. Your sunlight is sunlight," Kal-El said. "You handed me a meal." He lowered his arm. "I told you I didn't want to fight. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't an insult. I've buried enough people who were sure a contest would settle who mattered. It never does." He looked at the scorched fan on the wall, the cracked floor, the two frightened bureaucrats. "You're strong, genuinely. On my world, that fire would have made you a legend. I'm just telling you it won't make me an enemy. Those are different things, and this world seems to have forgotten it." For one long moment, Endeavor's flame guttered, not from exhaustion, but from something the man had not felt aimed at him in 20 years, which was pity that wasn't contempt. Then his phone shrieked, and the commission observer's phones shrieked a half-second behind it, the three tones overlapping into one ugly chord, and every professional in the room went still with the specific stillness of people whose alarms only sound for the worst kind of news. Endeavor read his screen. The heat drained out of the room all at once. "Hosu," he said. "A hero's down. 2 heroes." His jaw worked. The hero killers moved into the open. The name meant nothing to Kal-El. The reaction meant everything. He watched the fire go out of Endeavor entirely, watched the ambitious, wounded, prideful man he'd been reading for 5 minutes replaced in an instant by a professional pulling on his purpose like armor, and he thought, whatever this hero killer is, it frightens them in a place the rankings don't reach. The commission observers were already on their calls, and through the open door the whole facility had shifted into a higher, tighter register, the sound of an organization that had rehearsed this, and was still afraid. "Let me help," Kal-El said. "You're an unregistered variable in a holding room," one of the observers snapped, not looking up. "You are not deployed anywhere." "People are dying," Kal-El said, and there was no anger in it, which was worse. "I can hear it, if you'd let me listen. I can be there before your fastest hero has his boots on. You are not deployed." But Endeavor was already at the door, and he paused there, and he looked back at the man his fire had fed, and something passed over his scarred face that he would spend a long time refusing to name. Because Endeavor, God help him, believed in the work under all the ambition. That was the tragedy of him, that the vanity and the genuine article lived in the same chest, and a part of him, the part that had chased All Might for a reason, before the reason curdled into ego, wanted very much to see what the man from the sky did when he was pointed at something worth stopping. "Stay," Endeavor said. But he did not seal the door behind him. He simply left it open, and left, and let the choice sit in the room like the choice it was. Kal-El looked at the open door. He looked at the barred skylight and the sun climbing behind it, filling him drop by drop. He looked at the 2 bureaucrats already forgetting he existed as they managed the crisis into paperwork. Then he stepped out of the room they'd built for him, unhurried, and no one on that world had the power to stop him. He did not go to Hosu to fight the hero killer. He went because he could hear it, the specific sound of people afraid, which he had been walking toward his whole life, and because a man who lets that sound go unanswered is not a man he wanted to be, on any world. By the time he reached the district, it was already ending. The professionals had converged, 3 young ones, students by their fear and their courage both. had done something reckless and brave in an alley, and the hero killer had been taken, wrapped and bleeding and beaten, before Kal-El's shadow ever fell across the scene. He arrived to aftermath, the copper reek of blood on wet asphalt, the strobe of hero agency lights, a winged Nomu carcass still steaming where it had fallen, and, being loaded onto a restraint gurney under a dozen weapons, a gaunt scarecrow of a man draped in torn red, his eyes the only living thing left in a face, carved down to conviction. Kal-El stood at the edge of it, unnoticed in the chaos, and for the first time on this earth he heard the hero killer speak. The man's voice was ruined and quiet, and it carried anyway, the way true belief always carries. He spoke to the heroes binding him without fear of them, and what he said was not the raving Kal-El had braced for. He said that hero society was rotten. He said that the men and women who wore the costumes had turned a calling into a career, that they saved people for salaries and rankings and merchandising subsidiaries, that they had made a marketplace out of mercy and called it peace. He said the whole numbered licensed cheering machine was a lie, that only a rare few were true heroes, and the rest were frauds feeding off the word, and that he killed the frauds to burn the rot away so the real thing could breathe. He said the country had forgotten what a hero was, and someone had to remind it, even at the point of a blade. Kal-El stood in the strobing dark and felt something in his chest go very still, because the man was not wrong. That was the horror of it. Kal-El had walked this world for a single day, and he had read the same rot the scarecrow was bleeding out on the asphalt to indict. The gold ranks on the billboards, the doll of a dead hero still selling, the commission's careful voice saying situate him, the entire beautiful industry that sorted human beings into numbers and cheered the sort. He had watched a caste society do exactly this and end in ash. He had come here half expecting to be the only one who could see it, and here, dying under a dozen guns, was a man who saw it too, who had seen it and named it and refused to look away. His diagnosis is sound, Sol observed quietly, reading Kal-El's heartbeat the way it always did. You agree with roughly 40% of what that man just said. I can feel it in you. More than 40, Kal-El murmured. Then attend to the other 60, Sol said, and its calm was a kindness. Listen to his cure. Kal-El listened, and the stillness in his chest turned to cold. Because the scarecrow was not only saying the system was rotten, he was saying that the weak had no right to the word, that heroism was for the strong, the pure, the worthy, that the frauds deserved to die for the crime of being lesser, that a blade should decide who was permitted to be called good. He spoke of purging, of culling, of a world scrubbed down to only the deserving few. And Kal-El, who had grown up at the very bottom of a world that decided worth by caste, who had watched the worthy board their ships and leave the unworthy to burn, who had built his whole self around the conviction that the lowest laborer in the deepest pit was a man of steel, with every right to live, heard, in the mouth of the man who hated the system, the exact voice of the system he had fled. He had heard this before, not from a rebel, from Ra's al Ghul, from the Science League. The weak are a weight the strong must cut away. It was always dressed as reform. It was always, underneath, the oldest cruelty there was. The Scarecrow's diagnosis was Kal-El's own. The Scarecrow's cure was the thing Kal-El had crossed a dying world to destroy. That, Sol said softly, is going to be a problem for you, because this world is going to ask you to pick a side, and neither side is clean. The system files people, the rebel culls them, and you, Kal-El, believe the pit worker and the frightened bureaucrat and the fraud with the salary are all worth saving anyway. They are, Kal-El said. I know, Sol said. I only note that on this world, that belief does not appear to have a faction. Kal-El watched them load the hero killer into the dark and did not intervene, and did not leave, and understood that he had just been handed the shape of every hard choice this earth was going to make him face. Not heroes versus villains, something worse. A rotten system that deserved his contempt, defended by decent people. A true critique of that system, wielded by a butcher, and nowhere in the whole numbered country a place for a man who thought both of those things were true at once. He turned to go, 31% and climbing, the dawn of his second day already warming the east. He did not see the drone. It hung 200 meters up, small and dark and silent, and it had watched everything. The fire assessment leaked from a commission channel, the crater, the man who ate hellflame and would not burn. In a bar that did not exist on any map, its feed played across a scarred screen, and a knot of people who called themselves a league watched the man from the sky refuse to fall. A young man with a dry, ruined hand, pressed to his own face, leaned toward the screen, 5 fingers spread, and said nothing, because he did not yet understand what he was looking at, and it made him itch. But in the dark behind the young man, in a chair, breathing through a machine, an ancient thing that had collected the powers of a world for 100 years, leaned forward too, and smiled, because a new power had fallen into his country, a power that a fool would covet, and a genius would first understand. Erasure found nothing to erase, All for One said, savoring it, the way a collector savors a specimen he has never held. How wonderful. There is no quirk in him at all. A slow, pleased breath through the mask. Which means, my boy, there is nothing in him for me to take. He should have hated that. He had never in his long life met a power he could not eventually own. Instead, All for One found himself delighted, because a thing he could not steal was a thing he had not yet learned, and learning was the oldest pleasure he had left. Find out what feeds him, he told the dark. Find out what he loves. Every power has a leash, even the ones you cannot pull. We only have to find where his is buried. The drone climbed into the graying sky and turned its lens, patient as the thing that had sent it, toward a man drinking the dawn. They brought him to UA because no one else knew what to do with him, and because one man asked. The request did not come from the commission. It came, through 3 careful intermediaries, from a gaunt figure in an oversized coat, who had watched the crater feed 40 times for reasons of his own, and when All Might asked the country for something, the country still, for a little while longer, said yes. So on the morning of his 3rd day, Kal-El walked through the gates of the most famous hero school on the planet, flanked by an exhausted Erasure head, and trailed by 2 commission minders who had been told, in language they resented, to observe and not interfere. The campus was enormous, and strange, and gleaming, and Kal-El read it the way he read everything. The training fields built to simulate disasters, the dormitory towers, the great arched hall where, he'd been told, they held a festival, a tournament of children's powers, broadcast to the nation, scouted by agencies like a draft. Even the school was a funnel into the industry. Even here, the sorting had already begun, gentle and bright and total, on faces too young to have chosen it. And then a door opened onto a classroom, and 20 teenagers turned to look at him, and Kal-El felt the campus change shape in his chest. Because they were children, not products, not ranks, children, loud, terrified of him for exactly 4 seconds, and then, with the reckless resilience of the young, ferociously curious. A boy with green hair and scarred hands was on his feet before Eraserhead could finish the introduction, already asking about his durability quotient and his power output ceiling, and whether the red dust was a hardening type or a projection type, notebook out, eyes bright, and Kal-El, who had spent 3 days being assessed, filed, tested, and named by frightened adults, felt something in him unclench for the first time since he fell. I don't know what a hardening type is, Kal-El admitted, and the boy's whole face lit with the specific joy of a person handed a new mystery. But I'll show you, if your teacher allows it, and you can decide. Eraserhead from the doorway made a sound that on another man would have been a sigh. He allows it. God help me. They were the strangest, best hours he'd had on this earth. The children showed him their world without meaning to. A boy who was half ice and half fire, carrying something wounded and careful behind his eyes. Endeavor's son, Soul supplied quietly, and Kal-El filed the ache of that away. A boy whose palms cracked with explosions, and whose fury was a wall built over something he'd never name. A girl who floated everything she touched. A boy hard as stone. A girl who could not stop being kind. They were rivals, and they were a family, and the 2 things did not cancel. They had found, inside the funnel, a way to be more than the sort the funnel wanted them to be. Class 1A was the machine's raw material, and it had accidentally grown something the machine could not have designed, a found family of kids who pushed each other toward better instead of toward higher. It undid him a little. It was the first thing on this earth that looked like hope instead of hunger. The green-haired boy, Midoriya, the others called him, half fond, half despairing, followed Kal-El around the training field with the devotion of an acolyte and the questions of a scientist, and somewhere in the second hour, he asked the one that mattered, "Why didn't you fight back?" Midoriya said, "Against Eraserhead, against Endeavor. You could have. Everyone's seen the footage. Why did you just stand there and take it?" Kal-El crouched, so he was level with the boy, red dust settling around them both. "Where I'm from," he said, "the people who could fight always did. The strong proved they were strong by winning, and the winning decided who mattered, and the people who couldn't fight, the miners, the farm hands, the ones with nothing but their two hands, got sorted to the bottom and left there." He looked at the scarred hands and understood something about the boy without being told. "I was one of the ones at the bottom, for a long time, before the sun changed what I was. I promised myself that if I ever got strong, I would never once use it to prove I was worth more than the people who couldn't." He straightened. "Standing there and taking it is the fight, Midoriya. It's the harder one. Anyone strong can win. It takes something else to be strong and choose to be gentle." Midoriya wrote nothing down. He just stood there, holding it, and Kal-El watched the words land in the boy the way water lands in dry ground, and thought, this one already knew. Someone taught him this before I ever fell out of the sky. Who taught a child that on a world that ranks its heroes? He found out an hour later, when the greatest hero alive walked onto the field. All Might in public was a golden mountain, a laugh you could hear across a district, a symbol you could stand behind, and believe the dark would hold. All Might on the training field, with only the children and a man from another world to see, was still all of that. And Kal-El, who could hear a heartbeat across a city, heard immediately what the cameras never caught. The great golden frame was borrowed. The strength was real, but spent, running on hours that were nearly gone, a candle blazing bright, precisely because it had so little left to burn. Kal-El heard the ruined lungs under the booming voice. He heard the count running down. And he understood, all at once, that the pillar this entire trembling country leaned on was a dying man holding the roof up by will alone, and telling no one, so that the panic would not come before he'd found someone to hold it after him. So, All Might boomed, planting himself before the newcomer with a grin like a sunrise. "The man who fell from the sky and fed on Endeavor's fire. I've heard a great deal, my friend. And I've heard you're the symbol of peace," Kal-El said. He held out his hand. "I don't put much faith in symbols where I'm from. They tend to be printed on people by other people, to keep them in their place." He let the grip land, gentle, two impossibly strong men measuring each other and neither squeezing. But the children out here don't fight to prove they're better than each other. Someone taught them to push each other up instead. On this world, that's a rarer thing than the strength. I wanted to shake the hand that did it. All Might's grin didn't falter, but his eyes, for half a second, went to a place the public never saw them go. "You hear more than you let on," the old hero said quietly. "I hear everything," Kal-El said, just as quietly, so the children couldn't. "Including the part of you that's running out. No, don't. I won't say it where they can hear. I've held up a sky I knew was going to fall too. I know what it costs to smile through it, so the people underneath don't run." For a long moment, the two of them stood in the bright morning, the golden liar and the man who wouldn't be filed, understanding each other completely. "They're going to ask you to choose a side," All Might said at last, low. "The commission on one hand, the rot underneath on the other, and a man like you, strong enough to break either. Every faction on this earth is going to try to make you their weapon. Villains too. There's an old evil in this country that collects powerful things. A tired, honest smile. I can't tell you which side to stand on. I've spent my whole life being the side they were allowed to see, and I'm not sure anymore how much of the machine I was holding up alongside the people." He gripped Kal-El's shoulder. "But I'll tell you the one thing that kept me honest, when the rankings and the merchandise and the commission tried to make me something smaller than the work. Save people, because they're people, not because they're worthy, not because they're strong, not because it ranks. If you keep hold of that, the factions can't have you. It's the only leash they can't buy." Kal-El looked at the dying man who had just handed him, unknowing, The exact creed his own dead father had died believing. "That's the whole thing," Kal-El said softly. "That's the only thing. My father would have liked you." Above them, the sun climbed past its highest point, clean and clear for the first time since he'd fallen, and Kal-El felt it pour into him, felt the last of the depletion burn away, felt Saul's quiet report before it came. "Reserves at 91%, Saul said, and rising. "Kal-El, by tomorrow, you will be at full capacity for the first time on this world." He did not feel triumphant. He felt the weight of it, the way he always did. Full power on a world that would try to make him a weapon, defended by dying men and cursed by butchers. Watched. He could feel the drone again now, a whine at the edge of his hearing, patient 200 meters up, by something old and hungry in the dark. He turned his face to the sun and let it fill him, and made the only promise that had ever kept him honest. Save them because they're people. All of them. The pit worker and the bureaucrat, and the fraud with the salary, and the children who didn't know yet what they were being sorted into. Even the ones who were coming for him. The old evil moved first, the way old things do, not with force, but with a question. All for One did not send an army to UA. He sent one man, alone, walking, because he had understood something about the being from the sky that the Commission's whole apparatus had missed. You did not test such a creature with strength. Strength fed it. You tested it with a choice, and you watched what it reached for, and in the reaching, you learned where, if anywhere, the leash was buried. The man he sent wore a plain coat and an ordinary face, and he walked into a crowded shopping arcade 3 districts from the school at the busiest hour of the afternoon, and he carried, in a case, a device that All for One's people had built from a stolen suppression quirk and a great deal of patience. It was not meant to hurt the man from the sky. It was meant to hurt everyone around him, all at once, and see what he did. Kal-El heard it start from 4 kilometers away. He was on the UA field when it happened, the first scream, then the crowd sound curdling, then the specific frequency of hundreds of people afraid in an enclosed space. He was moving before Erasure had finished turning his head. Full sun, 96%, the depletion finally gone. For the first time on this earth, Kal-El flew the way he was meant to, and the sonic crack of his leaving cratered the training field dust and left the children staring at an empty sky. He reached the arcade in 9 seconds. What he found was cruelty engineered as a question. The device had blanketed the arcade in a field that did not suppress quirks. It inverted the safety ones. The girl whose quirk kept her light bones from breaking was collapsing under her own weight. The man whose quirk regulated his own body heat was cooking inside his skin. A child who floated was falling. It was a machine designed to turn every person's own power into the thing that killed them, and it had been placed in the most crowded space its maker could find, and it was killing perhaps 200 people at once, slowly, so that the man from the sky would have time to arrive and choose. He understood the trap in the first half-second. He did not care that it was a trap. That was the answer All for One's man had been sent to record, and Kal-El gave it to him without hesitation, because it was the only answer he had ever had. He did not go for the device. He went for the people. He was too fast to be watched. He caught the falling child. He set his own body under the crushing weight of the light-boned girl, and held her ribs from the inside of his cupped hands. He wrapped sunstone dust, a full-power cape now, 10,000 motes obeying a fully charged will, around the cooking man, and drew the heat out, because heat was solar energy, and solar energy was his to drink. He was in 19 places in 11 seconds, and Saul threaded the chaos, calling out the next collapse, and the next, and no one in that arcade died who had been alive when he arrived. Only then, with the people held, did he find the device and close his fist around it, and the inversion field died, and the screaming became weeping, which is the sound of people discovering they are going to live. All for One's man stood in the doorway and watched all of it, and did not fight, and did not flee. He simply spoke, in the voice his master had given him to carry. He wanted you to know, the man said, that he could have made you choose, the device or the people. He built it so you couldn't reach both in time. A small, borrowed smile. You reached the people, and let the device keep killing until they were safe. You never even tried to save both. You accepted that some things can't be won, and you spent yourself on the part that was flesh. The smile widened, not unkindly. He finds you fascinating. He wanted you to know that too. Tell him, Kal-El said, still cradling the child, that there was never a choice. There's only ever the people. Everything else is weather. He knows, the man said. That's exactly what fascinates him. And then, before the heroes arrived, the man triggered a warp quirk stitched into his own coat and was simply gone, leaving Kal-El in an arcade full of the saved and the shaken, holding a broken machine, and the certainty that something very old had just learned something very precise about him. That night, in the dark behind a bar that did not exist, All for One received the recording and watched it 4 times, and each time his ancient, ruined face did something almost tender. There it is, he breathed. There is the leash after all. The man at his side, the young one, the ruined hand pressed to his face, did not understand. He beat the trap. He saved all of them. That's not a weakness, Sensei. That is precisely the weakness, All for One said, with the patience of a teacher who has waited a century for a good pupil. You are looking for a power to steal, and there is none. His gift is not a quirk, and I cannot take it, and that is the first honest limit I have met in a very long time. A slow, pleased breath. But I do not need to take his power. I need only to know what he cannot refuse, and now I do. He tapped the frozen image, the man cradling a child, the device still killing in his other hand. He will always reach for the flesh, always. Put enough of the helpless in front of him, and he will spend everything he has to hold them, and he will never once let a single one fall to buy himself the win. That is not a hero, my boy. That is a predictable hero, and a predictable thing does not need to be stolen. The mask hissed. It needs only to be aimed. Show me a battlefield with 10,000 innocents on it, and I will show you a god who exhausts himself saving them one at a time, while I take the thing I actually came for, 3 streets over, unwatched. The young man's 5-fingered hand twitched with something that might have been understanding, or might have been envy. You can't erase him, he said. You can't steal him. You can't outmuscle him. So you're just going to make his goodness the trap. I am going to make his goodness the trap, All for One agreed, savoring it. It is the oldest technique I have. The only thing you can never take from a good man is the thing you use to destroy him. The screen glowed on the saved child's face. Now, find me a day when this city will have 10,000 people in the open at once, and I will teach our fallen star what his mercy costs. Kal-El sat on the roof of the UA dorms that night, under a clear sky, and did not sleep, because he did not need to, and because the day had left something cold in him that rest would not fix. You are troubled, Saul said. You saved every person in that arcade. 211 human beings are alive tonight who would not have been. By any measure I can construct, that was a victory. It was a message, Kal-El said. And I read it. He wasn't trying to kill those people. He was trying to find out whether I'd let some of them die to stop him. Now he knows I won't. He looked at the sleeping city, the 10 million heartbeats he could hear if he let himself. He knows exactly what I am now, Soul. And a thing that old, that patient, knowing what you are is how it beats you. Ra's al Ghul beat better men than me by knowing what they couldn't refuse and building the whole world around it. Then refuse it, Soul said. Let one fall, sometime, to win the larger thing. It would make you unpredictable. It would make you safe. No, Kal-El said, without heat, without hesitation. The way he'd answered the hero killer's cure, and the commission's leash, and every version of this argument he'd ever been handed on 2 worlds. That's the whole game, Soul. That's the exact trade every tyrant I've ever fought wanted me to make. Spend the few to buy the many. Cull the weak to save the system. Let the pit workers burn because saving them costs too much. The second I make that trade to win, I've become the thing I crossed a dead world to stop. He doesn't beat me by aiming my mercy at me. He beats me the day I decide my mercy is a weakness. He closed his eyes. So I won't. I'll save all of them, every time, and let it cost whatever it costs. If that makes me predictable, then I'll be the most predictable man on this earth. There are worse things to be known for. Soul was quiet for a while. When it spoke again, it was in the voice his mother had built into it, and it did not argue. Your father used to say that, Soul said softly. The recording of him I carry. He said the people of Steel don't get to pick which of their own are worth the wait. He said the day you start weighing them, you've already joined the Science League. A pause. I believe he would be at peace with the man on this roof. Kal-El said nothing. Above him, the clean sky held its stars, and somewhere in the dark an old thing was drawing a circle on a map around 10,000 innocents, waiting for the day it could make a good man prove exactly how good he was, and take everything else while the god was busy saving lives. Full power, at last. And for the first time since he fell, Kal-El understood that being unbeatable was not going to be enough on this world. They weren't going to fight his strength. They were going to fight his goodness. And his goodness was the one thing he had sworn never to defend. All for One found his day 9 mornings later, and he did not build it. He simply waited for the country to build it for him. Because a society that turns heroism into a spectacle will always, eventually, gather its own people into one place to watch. They called it a Hero Billboard Chart Festival, a public ranking event, a stadium and the streets around it packed with families come to cheer the numbers. The gold ranks made flesh and paraded, agencies working the crowd, merchandise moving by the truckload, tens of thousands of people in the open at once, in Hosu, under a bright clean sky. All for One looked at it and saw what he always saw, not a celebration, but a room full of the helpless, gathered by their own love of the ledger, into the exact shape of a trap. He sent the Nomu at the height of the afternoon. Not one, a dozen, the winged kind and the crushing kind and worse, engineered horrors with borrowed quirks stitched into stolen flesh, dropped into a crowd of 30,000 from transport warps opened at rooftop height, so there would be no warning and no line to hold. It was not an assassination. It was not even principally an attack on the heroes. It was a machine for generating helpless people faster than any rescuer could reach them, and it was aimed, with a century of precision, at exactly one man. Kal-El was there. Of course he was there. He had gone because the children of Class 1A were performing in it, and because All Might had asked him to come stand where the country could see a strong man choosing to protect rather than to rank, and All for One had counted on that too. Had counted on the god being present when the screaming started, because a trap only works if the animal is standing in it. The first Nomu hit the crowd and Kal-El was already moving. What followed, the country would talk about for years, and never quite agree on what it had seen. He was everywhere, full sun, full charge, a fully realized Kryptonian moving through a disaster at a speed the human eye rendered as absence. A man simply gone from one place and arrived in another. A falling grandstand, held on his shoulders, while he pulled a family out from under it. A winged Nomu's dive caught by the ankle, and redirected up into empty sky. 100 people moved from where the death was, to where it wasn't, in the time it took the professionals to draw breath. Saul wove the chaos into a map and called the next collapse and the next, and the Sunstone Cape spread into a hard red canopy over a section of bleachers, and held while beneath it 2,000 people who should have been crushed simply weren't. The heroes fought too, Endeavor's hellflame carving a Nomu in half, Eraserhead's erasure blinding a horror mid-lunge so a student could finish it, All Might arriving in a golden thunderclap that put heart back into a routed crowd. They were not useless. The iron law of this world's top tier held. They were strong, they were brave, they bled to hold the line. But there were 30,000 people, and a dozen engineered monsters, and a maker who had designed the whole event to produce more helplessness than any force could answer. And the only thing on that battlefield fast enough and strong enough to be in all the places the dying were, was the one man All for One had built the entire trap to occupy. And Kal-El knew it, even as he saved them, even as he spent himself pouring into the crowd, holding the grandstand, drinking a Nomu's fire, catching the child, catching the next child. Some cold, clear part of him that had learned tyranny at its knee understood that this was the arcade again, scaled to a nightmare. He's not here for the crowd is the leash. He's aiming my mercy at me. Somewhere, right now, 3 streets over, unwatched, he's taking the thing he actually came for. He was right. Kal-El, Soul said, threading a signal it should not have been able to catch, its voice tightening. There is a secondary operation, 2 kilometers northeast, a support technology laboratory. Commission Black, off the public grid. The Nomu are a diversion. Something is breaching it while every hero in the prefecture is here holding the crowd. Kal-El, holding 2,000 lives up on a canopy of his mother's dust, with the dying still screaming under his hands, felt the trap close with the beautiful precision All for One had promised himself. 2 kilometers northeast, unwatched, the old evil was taking something. Here, 30,000 people. If he left to stop the theft, the canopy fell, and the grandstand came down, and hundreds died in the seconds it took the professionals to fill the gap he'd leave. If he stayed, he saved every soul in the stadium, and let the ancient thing walk out of a black lab with whatever it had crossed a city to steal. The choice, the actual choice, the one the arcade had been a rehearsal for. He made it in less than a second, and he made it the way his father would have, and All for One, watching through a dozen borrowed eyes, delighted, got exactly the answer he had staked the entire operation on. Kal-El stayed with the people. He did not go northeast. He let the theft happen. He poured himself into the crowd and held the canopy and caught the children, and let the old evil win the thing it had come for. Because 2 kilometers away there was a machine being stolen, and here there were 30,000 human beings who would die if he left. And Kal-El of the Labor Guild did not, had never, would never, weigh the flesh in front of him against a prize. There's only ever the people. Everything else is weather. It was not weakness. It was the most deliberate act of his life. He looked the trap in the eye, understood it completely, and chose the trap. Chose to be robbed. Chose to let the enemy score. Because the alternative was to become the enemy. He gave All for One the win, and kept his soul, and knew precisely what he was doing, and did it anyway. By the time the last Nomu fell and the crowd was safe, every soul in that stadium alive, 30,000 people who would go home to their families that night, the Black Lab 2 kilometers northeast was empty, and whatever it had contained was gone, and All for One's man had warped out clean 40 minutes before. Kal-El stood in the emptied stadium in the long gold light of late afternoon, the saved streaming past him in their thousands, weeping and laughing and searching for their children, and he had never in his life felt so much like he had lost. You saved 30,000 people, Sol said quietly. Not one death in that stadium, not one. I know, and he took what he came for. I know that too. Kal-El watched a father find his daughter in the crowd and fold around her, and the ache of it and the cost of it lived in him at the same time, the way they always had. That was the whole design, Sol. He built a day where saving everyone and stopping him were 2 different directions, and he made sure I could only run one way, and I ran the way I always run. He knew I would. He's known since the arcade. He closed his eyes. He didn't beat my strength. He didn't need to. He beat me by understanding that I'd let him win before I'd let a child fall, and I did. And I'd do it again. Then it was not a defeat, Sol said. It was a price. Kal-El opened his eyes to the streaming, saved, ordinary crowd, the pit workers and the bureaucrats and the frauds and the children of this numbered country, every one of them alive because a man had refused to trade them for a win. Find out what he took, he said, because whatever it was, he thought 30,000 lives were a fair distraction to buy the time to steal it. A thing that old doesn't spend that much, unless what he's building is worth it. He turned toward the lowering sun, letting it fill the reserves he'd poured out across the afternoon. He's aimed my mercy at me once and it worked. He'll do it again, bigger, because now he knows the leash is real. A long breath. Next time he'll gather 100,000, and I'll still choose them. He's found the one move I can't counter, Sol, not because I'm not strong enough, because I won't be someone who counters it. Across the ruined stadium, unseen in the crowd, a commission liaison lowered her phone from a call with the president's voice and looked at the man in the gold light, the man who had just saved 30,000 citizens and, in the same afternoon, let the nation's most dangerous enemy walk out of a classified facility with a weapon because he would not leave the people to stop him. To Kal-El, it was the only choice a hero could make. To the Hero Public Safety Commission, watching a god prove he could be reliably drawn away from anything by putting enough innocence in front of him, it was something else entirely. It was a vulnerability. A predictable, exploitable, catastrophic vulnerability, sitting at large in their country, unranked and unleashed. A hero. The enemy had already learned to aim like a weapon. And the commission did not tolerate weapons it did not hold. Oshino Ray began, that evening, to write the recommendation she had been dreading since the crater. Track 1 has failed, she typed. Subject cannot be integrated. His ethical architecture makes him permanently exploitable by any adversary willing to endanger civilians, and he cannot be trained out of it without ceasing to be useful. Track 2 is now the only viable posture. She paused and made herself finish it, because someone had to hold the ledger. Recommend immediate development of a reliable means of containment. We must be able to stop him, not because he is evil, because he is good, and his goodness can be turned. And a good man who can be turned is the most dangerous thing this country has ever failed to control. The commission did not come for him with an army. It came for him with a room. They invited him. That was the word on the summons, invited. And Kal-El appreciated the honesty of the lie. To a commission facility on the edge of the city, ostensibly to be debriefed on the stadium attack. He went, because he had learned that the fastest way to see what the careful people were really building was to walk into the room they built for you and listen. Eraser tried to come with him, and was turned away at a door that had never opened for an underground hero. All Might tried, and was told, with exquisite politeness, that the symbol of peace's presence was not required. That was how Kal-El knew the room was serious. They had cleared out the 2 people on this earth who might have stood beside him. The room was white and windowless, he noted, no sun, a small unsubtle statement, and it held a long table, and at the table sat Hoshino Rei, and behind her, mounted on a frame and aimed at the chair they offered him, was the thing they had built in 9 days from the wreckage of the arcade device, and a great deal of commission money. He did not sit. You built a machine, Kal-El said, looking at it. It was ugly and enormous, and it hummed, and Sol was already reading it, reporting quietly at the edge of his hearing. You built it fast. You built it aimed at a chair. I'll save you the speech. You don't want to debrief me. You want to know if this stops me? Yes, Hoshino said. She did not insult him with denial. That, too, he appreciated. It's a solar inversion suppressor, reverse engineered from a device recovered at the arcade, refined with everything we learned watching you drink Endeavor's fire and pour yourself out at the stadium. It doesn't erase your power. We know now there's nothing to erase. It starves it. It floods the field around you with an inverted solar signature. Your cells try to draw energy, and it takes energy from them instead. Sol's analysis is correct, by the way. It would work. She folded her hands on the table. You have perhaps 40 seconds inside its field before you're weaker than the humans guarding this room. I'm telling you that plainly because I want you to understand that I'm not bluffing, and I want you to understand why. She is not bluffing, Sol confirmed, very quietly. It would work, Kal-El. I could not shield you from it for more than a few seconds. If they activate it, you should already be gone. Kal-El stood in the windowless room and looked at the careful woman who had built a cage for a god, and felt the whole shape of the trap, not the stadium's trap, a subtler one, the oldest one on any world. You watched me save 30,000 people, he said, and you built this. I watched you save 30,000 people, Hoshino agreed, and let All for One walk out of a classified facility with a prototype weapon, because he put those 30,000 people between you and the choice. And I understood, watching it, that you will always make that trade. Any enemy who has ever seen the footage now knows exactly how to move you. Gather enough innocence, and you become a fixed point, a hero who can be pinned in place by his own mercy, while the real work happens elsewhere. You are the most powerful being in this country, and you are the single most exploitable one. And those 2 facts together are the most dangerous thing I have ever had to file. Her voice did not rise. It never rose. You are not evil. That would be easier. You are good in a way that can be aimed. And I am responsible for a country that cannot afford a good man who can be aimed at it. So you'll cage me. So I need to be able to, Hoshino said. There's a difference, and I need you to hear it, because everything depends on whether you can. I am not asking to imprison you. I am asking you to accept a leash, to register, to rank, to operate under commission handling, to let us hold the means to stop you, so that when an enemy aims you at us, we have an answer that isn't prey. Accept the structure, and the suppressor stays in this room, off, a contingency we never use. Refuse it. Remain what you are, a god who answers to nothing and can be turned by any villain with enough hostages. and I will have no honest choice but to treat you as the weapon you'd be, and use this the first time you frighten us." She let it sit. "Those are the shapes. I've thought about it for 9 days, and there is no third one. You made sure of that at the stadium. You showed the whole world your leash, and now everyone who saw it, me, all for one, every villain in this country, is going to pull it. The only question left is who holds the other end. Us, under law, with restraint, or them, without." It was, Kal-El thought, the most honest version of the oldest speech he had ever been given, because he had heard it before. He had heard it from the Science League, on the last good day of Krypton. Someone responsible must hold the power, or chaos takes it. Better the careful than the cruel. The structure must survive or everyone dies. He had heard it from Ra's al Ghul, dressed as ecology. He had heard it in 100 guild yards from 100 foremen who genuinely believed the sorting kept the world from falling apart. And the terrible thing, the thing that had always made it hard, was that the people who said it were usually not lying, and usually not cruel. Hoshino-Rei was not a tyrant. She was a careful, frightened person, holding a ledger she believed kept a country alive, and she was offering him the gentlest cage she could build, and she meant every word. That was what made it the trap it was, not the machine, the reasonableness. "You're right about one thing," Kal-El said. "The stadium showed everyone my leash. You're right that they'll pull it. You're right that I'll make that trade every time, and you're right that it makes me exploitable. And you're right that a careful hand on the leash is better than a cruel one. Every single thing you've said is true." He walked, slowly, to the humming machine, and the guards tensed, and Hoshino's hand moved a centimeter toward the activation, and he stopped, and simply looked at it, and did not touch it. "And I still can't accept it. Let me tell you why. Because you've been honest with me, and you're owed the same." He turned back to her. "Where I'm from, there was a caste that held all the power and all the knowledge, and they were not cruel, and they were not lying, and they truly believed that someone responsible had to hold the world together or it would fall, so they held it. They registered everyone, they ranked everyone. They built the gentlest cages they could and called it order, and the people at the bottom, my parents, the pit workers, the ones with nothing but their hands, accepted the leash, because the alternative was chaos. And the careful hand really was better than the cruel one." His voice did not rise either. It went, if anything, quieter and heavier for it. "And when the world started to die, the careful, responsible, not cruel people who held the leash used it to save themselves. They boarded their ships, and they left the leash to burn, because that is what a leash is for, Hoshino. It is not for restraint. It is for the day the hand that holds it decides which lives are worth keeping. Every leash ever made has that day inside it. Yours does too. You just haven't reached it yet." Hoshino-Rei said nothing. Her hand had not moved. "You think the danger is a good man who can be aimed," Kal-El said. "I think the danger is a country that would rather hold a god's leash than fix the rot that makes gods necessary." The hero killer saw the rot, and his answer was to cull the weak. "You see my mercy, and your answer is to leash the strong. And nobody in your whole numbered country is willing to say the simple thing, which is that the rot is the sorting itself, the ranking, the ledger, the belief that some people get to hold the leash and some people get to wear it. I won't wear it, not because I don't trust you, because I trusted people exactly like you once, and I buried a world because of it." He looked at the machine one last time. "Turn it on if you have to. I won't fight you, and I won't hurt anyone in this room, and if it starves me, you'll have your answer. But you will never once make me your weapon, and you will never once make me choose the ledger over a life, because the day I do that, I've boarded the ship, and I promised the ash of my whole world I never would." The room was very still. Saul, at the edge of his hearing, said nothing at all, because there was nothing to add. Hoshino-Rei sat with her hand near the switch and looked at the man who had just, calmly and without anger, refused the only 2 shapes she had been able to imagine, and she understood, with the cold clarity that made her good at her terrible job, that he had done something she had not planned for. He had not accepted the leash. He had not resisted it either. He had simply declined to be someone it could hold, and stood there defenseless in front of the machine that could starve him, and dared her to be the Science League. She did not turn it on. Not because she was persuaded. She was not. She still believed, in the ledger part of her soul, that a god who could be aimed, had to be answerable, and she would carry that belief out of the room. But because she was, in the end, not the Science League, and the difference between her and the caste that burned his world was the one thing he had bet the whole conversation on, that a careful person, shown the ship they were about to board, might choose to step back from the ramp. "Get out," Hoshino said quietly, "before I remember my job." And then, as he reached the door, because she was honest to the last, "The recommendation still stands, Kal-El. The machine stays. I'll be overruled or I won't. But there are people above me who watch the same stadium footage and reach the same conclusion and don't have my hesitation. They'll come for you with this again, and the next hand on the switch won't be mine." "I know," Kal-El said, at the door, into the light of the hallway that had a window. "I've never once been safe on this world. I didn't come here to be safe." He looked back at her, and there was no triumph in it, only the old, tired kindness that had frightened the peacemakers more than any blow. "Thank you for not turning it on. That was the harder thing. Anyone frightened can pull a switch. It takes something else to be frightened and choose not to." He walked out into the sun, and behind him, in a windowless room, a careful woman sat alone with a machine that could kill a god, and did not activate it, and began, for the first time in a long, ledgered life, to wonder whether the thing she had spent her career protecting was worth what it asked her to become. She did not know yet, but she had stepped back from the ramp, and on a day that was coming faster than any of them knew, that single step was going to matter more than every rank on every billboard in the country. All for One made his move on the day the sun was highest, which was either mockery or homework, and with a being like him, it was always both. He had spent the stolen prototype well. Whatever he'd taken from the Black Lab while the god held up the stadium, it had gone into a single, catastrophic gambit. Not a hostage play this time, not another elegant little trap to study Kal-El's mercy, but the real work the studying had been for. He had learned that the man from the sky could be aimed by innocence, and could not be bought or broken or leashed, and so he had built the one battlefield that used all of it at once. He gathered his 100,000, and he gathered them, with a century's cruelty, in the exact place the god could not refuse and could not win. He attacked the city center at noon, with everything. The League came in force, Shigaraki's decay spreading down a boulevard, buildings sloughing to dust on contact. Not the city block apocalypse he would one day become, but enough, more than enough. A young monster's power turning a district to ruin. The Nomu came in the dozens, and behind them, unhurried, breathing through his mask, came the old evil himself, into the open at last, because he had built a day where being seen no longer cost him anything. But the gambit was not the League, and it was not decay, and it was not the Nomu. The gambit was the device. Kal-El, Soul's voice was tight as wire. The stolen prototype. He's finished it. It's a solar inversion field, the Commission's own design, scaled up, weaponized. He's mounted it on a tower in the center of the district. When it activates, it will blanket the entire city core in an inverted signature. A beat. It will starve you. Everywhere. At once. There will be no sunlight in that zone that feeds you. Only sunlight that drains you. And there are 100,000 people inside the radius. There it was. The whole thing, the entire century of patience, folded into one perfect cruelty. All for One had taken the Commission's leash, the one machine on this earth that could stop a god, and built a version of it 1,000 times larger, and staked it in the middle of 100,000 hostages. If Kal-El entered the zone to save them, the field starved him. He'd be weaker than a child inside of 40 seconds, unable to save anyone, drowning in a false sun. If he stayed out to keep his strength, 100,000 people died in a district collapsing under decay and Nomu, with every hero in the city already overmatched. Save them and be starved. Stay strong and let them die. The arcade, the stadium, every rehearsal, all of it built toward this. The day the god's mercy and the god's power were finally, surgically severed, so that he could have one or the other but never both. All for One had solved the man from the sky. He had found the equation with no answer. He had made exactly one mistake, and it was the mistake tyrants always made, on every world Kal-El had ever bled on. He had assumed the god would fight the trap alone. Kal-El flew into the starving zone at noon, and did not hesitate, because of course he didn't. He was already spending himself. already weakening, already pouring the last of his charge into pulling people out of the decay's path before the field ate him hollow. 40 seconds, Sol had said. He used them to move 1,100 people. Then the strength began to go. The sun above him turned to poison, his cells crying out for a light that only took. And Kal-El of the Labor Guild sank slowly toward the ruined street, weaker with every heartbeat. 100,000 still trapped and his power draining out of him like water from cupped hands. And the city he had refused to leash rose up around him and held. Because he had not spent the last 9 days being filed. He had spent them being seen. Endeavor hit the Nomu line like a comet, hellflame carving a corridor through the horrors so the trapped could flee the way the god was too weakened to open. And every Nomu he burned for the man on the ground, buying the seconds Kal-El no longer had the strength to buy himself. All Might came down in a golden thunderclap in the heart of the decay. The last of his borrowed hours poured out without accounting, standing between Shigaraki and 10,000 people, so that a starving alien would not have to. Erasure heads erasure, blinded Nomu after Nomu mid-lunge, threading impossible saves through the chaos. And Class 1A, the children, the found family the machine had accidentally grown, moved through the district in a chain. The ice and fire boy walling off the decay's spread, the floating girl lifting the fallen clear, the green-haired boy who'd learned save people because they're people, from a dying symbol, and a man from the sky, everywhere at once, doing the thing Kal-El had taught them was the whole of it. He had told them, on a training field, that standing there and being gentle was the harder fight. They had understood him better than he knew. But it was not the heroes who broke the trap. It was the careful woman who had chosen not to turn on her machine. Hoshino-Rei had spent 9 days wondering whether the thing she protected was worth what it asked her to become. And All for One's tower gave her the answer she had been avoiding. She stood in a commission command center and watched the enemy raise the country's own leash, her design, refined, scaled, staked in the middle of 100,000 citizens. And she understood, finally and completely, what the man in the windowless room had been trying to tell her. Every leash ever made has that day inside it. The day the hand that holds it decides which lives are worth keeping. She had built a machine to stop a good man who could be aimed, and the first hand to truly wield its design was the cruelest thing in the country, and it was aimed at 100,000 of the people the machine was supposed to protect. The leash had reached its day. It always did. He had told her, and she had not believed him, and here it was. So Hoshino-Rei made the choice that the Science League had never made. She stepped off the ramp. She had the schematics. She had the frequency. She had spent 9 days with her own device. And she knew, better than anyone alive, exactly how to break a solar inversion field. Because she had built the original, and a maker always knows where the seam is. She routed everything the Commission had to Sol, to the AI in the God's dying suit, an open channel and a lifetime of restraint spent in a single transmission, the field's harmonic, the tower's shielding, the one frequency that collapses the inversion. She is handing him the key to her own cage. Kal-El. Sol's voice, threaded with something that was almost hope. The Commission liaison. Hoshino. She's given me the field's collapse frequency. I can broadcast a counter-signature through the sunstone dust, but I need power to do it, and you have almost none left. It would take everything you have, every last %. You would be helpless afterward, in the middle of a battlefield, until the sun could feed you again. Kal-El, kneeling in a false and starving noon with the last of his strength, with 100,000 people trapped, and a dying symbol, and a class of children, and a careful woman who had finally stepped off the ramp, did not weigh it. He had never once weighed it. That was the whole reason All for One's equation had no answer he would ever accept. Do it, he said. All of it. Empty me. He poured the last of himself into the sunstone dust, and Sol broadcast the frequency Hoshino-Rei had given up her cage to send, and the counter-signature rolled out through 10,000 motes of Krypton's last dust in a wave of red light, and the tower's field collapsed. The false noon died. The poisoned sun became sunlight again. And in the instant the inversion broke, in the half-second before the true sun could pour back into a hollow, emptied God, All for One understood that he had lost. Not because he had been outfought, but because he had built a trap for a man who fought alone. And the man had not been alone. Because a god who refuses to weigh lives spends 9 days accidentally teaching a whole city to refuse it too. The sun came back, and it came back into a fully open Kryptonian who had just spent every drop he had, so it filled him the way a flash flood fills a canyon, all at once, all the way. A man drinking a whole clean noon in a single searing breath, and rising off the ruined street saturated, blazing, full, into an enemy who had spent his one perfect gambit and had nothing left behind it. What followed was not a fight, it was a reckoning. He did not kill All for One. He was never going to. That was the 60% of the hero killer's cure he'd rejected on his first night, the line between the man he was and the tyrants he fought. But he took the old evil apart with a gentleness more terrible than rage, a fully charged Kryptonian, moving faster than a century of stolen quirks could answer. Sunstone dust binding the reaching hands, heat vision searing the Nomu stitching from the air, 100,000 people flooding to safety through corridors the heroes had bought, and the god now held wide open. Shigaraki's decay found nothing to grip on a man whose skin was not made of anything this world could unmake, and All for One, ancient and patient and undone, was wrapped in red dust and lifted off his feet and held, at last, in front of the city he had gathered to slaughter. You built the perfect equation, Kal-El told him, quietly, so only the old thing could hear. Save them or keep my strength, never both. It was beautiful. It was the best trap anyone's ever set for me on any world. Red dust tightened. You just never understood what you were trapping. You thought I was a god. I'm a pit worker with a good son, and a pit worker doesn't fight alone. That's the whole thing you people never learn, on any world, in any ledger. You cull us and leash us and sort us, and you never once notice that the only thing we ever had, the thing your caste never has, is that when one of us goes down, the rest of us reach. He looked at the flooding, saved city, the heroes, the children, the woman who broke her own cage. You aimed my mercy at me, and the whole city caught it. He handed All for One to the professionals, and the old evil went into the dark, still not quite comprehending the shape of what had beaten him, which was perhaps the only mercy in it. And in the golden, unpoisoned noon, on a battlefield where 100,000 people were streaming home alive, Kal-El turned and found All Might on his knees in the rubble, the last of the borrowed hours finally, visibly spent, the golden frame flickering, a dying man who had poured out his final reserves to hold a line, so a starving stranger wouldn't have to. The symbol looked up at the man from the sky and smiled, ruined and honest, and said the thing that would follow Kal-El for the rest of his time on this earth. Save them because they're people, All Might rasped, quoting his own creed back at the one man who had never needed to be taught it. You held it, the whole way down, you held it, a cough, bright and final at the edges. This world made heroes into a ledger, my friend. You just reminded 100,000 people what the word actually meant. Don't let them file that away. Make them remember it. Above them both, the sun poured down, clean and whole and gold, into a hero without a rank, without a license, without a leash. A man the entire numbered country had just watched, save it by refusing every single thing the country had tried to make him. The city did not know how to file what had happened, and that, in the end, was the whole of it. In the weeks after, the machinery tried. It always tried. The merchandising subsidiary released a figure of the man in the red cape, and it sold out in a morning. And a morning show gave him a proper hero name at last. Kal-El meant nothing to them, so they called him what the symbol had called him at the end, the one who reminded us, which was too long to trademark and so it never quite stuck, which was the first thing about this world that had ever gone right. The Hero Public Safety Commission convened to decide his rank, and discovered it had no box. He held no license. He answered to no agency. He had saved 100,000 people while starving, and let their most dangerous enemy score a victory rather than trade a single life, and broken their own cage to do it. And there was simply no category in the whole numbered country for a man who did all of that, and would take neither a rank nor a leash for any of it. So they left the box empty. Hoshino Ray saw to that. She had stepped off the ramp, and she found, to her own quiet surprise, that she could not step back onto it. The suppressor stayed in its windowless room, off, and the recommendation that had once demanded a means to stop him was quietly replaced by a single line in a file that no one above her ever fully approved. and no one ever rescinded. Subject is not a weapon, and cannot be made one. Recommend the country learn to live with a hero it does not own. It was the most radical thing the Commission had ever failed to prevent. All Might did not die that day, though it had been close, closer than the public would ever know. But the borrowed hours were nearly gone now, spent on a battlefield holding a line for a stranger, and both of them understood that the symbol of peace was setting, and that a country built on leaning against one golden man was going to have to learn, very soon, to stand another way. The old hero seemed, strangely, at peace with it. You reminded them what the word meant, he'd said. He had spent his whole life being the side the ledger allowed people to see. He thought, now, that the country might survive learning to see the rest. Kal-El never found the way home. The rift that dropped him was a Lazarus failsafe, and a stolen containment charge, and a hole in the world, and there was no map back through it. And Saul, Mother's voice Saul, the last vestige of a dead house, searched the sky every clear night, and found only this world's unfamiliar stars. He grieved that, quietly, the way he grieved everything, without weighing it, without letting it become a wound he'd make anyone else carry. But a pit worker does not need to be home to do the work. The work is wherever the frightened people are. So he stayed, not as a ranked hero, not as a commission asset, not as a symbol printed on a soft drink billboard over a gold number. He stayed the way he'd lived on his own earth, a lone, wandering champion of the people the ledger forgot, drawn always toward the sound he'd been walking toward his whole life, the specific sound of the helpless, in the pits and the low districts, and the places the rankings never reached. He worked beside the laborers this world sorted to the bottom. He stood between the powerless and the powerful, and asked no one's license to do it. And every so often a class of students who had learned, save people, because they're people from a dying man and a fallen star, would find him already there, and reach when he went down, the way he'd taught them the whole city could. He had come to a world that had turned heroism into a caste and a career and a ledger, and he had not fixed it. One man doesn't fix a rot that old, on any earth. But he had reminded 100,000 people, and a class of children, and one careful woman with her hand on a switch, that under all the numbers there had once been a simpler thing. That the lowest laborer in the deepest pit was a man of steel, with every right to be saved, and that the day you start weighing which lives are worth the trouble is the day you've boarded the ship and left your own world to burn. They would forget, some of them. The machine would try to file it away, to rank it, to sell it. That was what machines did. But the man in the red dust was still out there, under the same sun that fed him, refusing to be filed. And a country that had spent generations learning to cheer its ledger had, for the first time, been shown a hero it could not own, could not leash, and could not stop loving anyway. Somewhere in the low districts, a foreman was leaning on the powerless again, and a figure of steel in Krypton's last dust was already turning toward the sound, unhurried, drinking the light, keeping a promise he'd made in the ash of a dead world to every pit worker who ever wore a crest as a mark of pride. Children of the sun, his father had called them, those who made their way with their own two hands. The people of steel. He'd found them here too. He always would. On any world, in any ledger, they were the only ones he'd ever really come to save.